Okay, welcome back. We're going to do this drawing from a study for image called Astronomy by Elihu Vedder, who was an American artist active in the 1800s. And it's a seated figure, an idealized figure. And we are going to start by drawing a horizontal line for the position of the bench upon which she is seated. And I'm going to work kind of sight size here, so I'm going to carry across. If this is the bench, here's the top of her head, and here's roughly where her feet are planted. And let me check my focus here. Okay. Now, most models, if you go to life drawing, most models would rather sit down if it's a long pose. And if you're a beginner, you're probably going to want to draw a long pose because it's going to take you a while to figure things out. So you have to get used to drawing seated poses, even though they're a little harder than standing poses. It's harder for you, it's easier for the model. So the challenge is, what I find is most people make the head too small in a seated pose. They make the head too big in a standing pose. So we could even count heads like we've been doing to get some idea of how much room this head needs to take up in the overall drawing. So if that's a head, there's 1, about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, approximately 6 heads going down. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that, at least we have some idea. If your head is like an 1/8 or a 1/4, you need to make an adjustment. So notice I'm blocking in a kind of sideways cranium, and I'm planting it on the opening of the neck in the rib cage, which I'm thinking of as being right about here, and I'm checking the angle of the neck, which is tilting a little bit to our left. And then I'm going to be thinking about the sternum, which is showing me which way the rib cage is pointed. And the rib cage is basically going to be in here. And it's because she's leaning forward, it's angled forward. Remember, in a standing pose, usually the rib cage is angled back the other way, but her rib cage is angled forward because she's leaning a lot of her weight on this globe. So the next form I'm going to conceptualize is the pelvis. And normally the pelvis is tipping forward, but her pelvis is basically, I'm going to think of it as a box that's basically like straight up and down. And again, that's a peculiarity of the seated pose that we're dealing with here. And we're thinking about this overall movement that Proko calls the bean, the movement between the rib cage and the pelvis, and trying to get them, it's very important to get them oriented correctly in relation to each other. Now, we can see easily that the thigh starts around the level at the top of the pelvis here. It's a little hard to know how long to make that leg, though, and we're going to use some angular thinking to get from the forehead, which we've already established, to the knee. And I would say this is about 25 degrees. So if you can copy this angle, that's going to tell you where to put the knee of the overlapping leg. And having thought about it that way, that's going to help us a lot with the lower leg, because we're basically just going to continue this angle straight like that. And then to determine how long to make that, we can think about another angle. We can go from this point, which we already found, and this angle is closer to, I would say, about 40 degrees. So that's going to help us get to finding where the foot terminates. Now, I don't like to just think about contours. I like to think about the direction of limbs, so that the femur is actually moving up through this form to about here, and then the tibia is coming down inside that, and that's going to help me figure out the contour on the other side, which is much wider here near the bench and then gets much narrower up here. And to do the lower leg, I already know where the knee is because it's up sort of adjacent to, but underneath this knee. But what I want to find out is where to put the heel. And I'm going to use a plumb line to find that. If we go straight up from the heel, we end up just behind the neck. So that means we go straight through the center of the bean to here. That's about, the heel has to hit this line, and it's hitting it at a level that's below this point that we found earlier. So we're going to slope down about 10 degrees, and that's going to give us the heel. There's the axis of the tibia for that part of the leg. Notice that this heel juts out here at a point that's above where above the one we found, kind of like that. And at this point, I think it would be helpful to draw the ball, but I'm going to think about where the ball would, if we could see through these forms, where would the ball intersect the forms that we're seeing? So notice that it sort of grazes or cuts through the end of that knee that we found, and it intersects about almost halfway down the tibia, and about a quarter of the way along the top of this thigh. So we're going to go a quarter of the way here, almost halfway down here, and grazing the knee here, and that's going to help us with the get the ball the correct size. I can also pull it horizontal across, and we can see where the top of the ball intersects the rib cage. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're just we're figuring out the geometry of this pose before we move on to any kind of details. And I'm just going to drop the axis of this arm through here, and I'm thinking of kind of stick figure arms now. I'm just getting the angles. This is going down at about 45 degrees and then straight down. There's that little hand, and the other hand is going to be out here somewhere. So at this point we have really barely more than a gesture drawing, but it's not, this was not an intuitive gesture drawing. This was like an analytical kind of figuring out the pose geometrically. But we should yield the same result, which is like if you showed someone your drawing at this point, the person should be able to read it well enough to get into the pose. That's how I like to think about it. Is it legible as the pose? And it's a good time to sort of kick back and assess your work. As I assess my work, I'm seeing like that this tibia seems a lot shorter than this one, which is telling me that I might have misread this angle. I might have made that a little too steep. So I'm going to just bring this heel up a little. You're probably going to see different flaws in your own work, but this is the stage where we want to make corrections like that. We don't want to wait until we've done a lot of beautiful detail and shading work. And I'm also feeling like I'm suggesting a little too much of a tilt downward in the head, so I'm going to just slightly change these angles to get the head a little more looking straight to the left. Okay, ready or not, this is the point in the drawing where I like to do the portrait. And that's partly because I'm always afraid I'm going to screw it up. And I know if I get the portrait done in a way that seems all right to me, I'm going to be happy to continue working on the drawing. If I screw up the portrait, I'm going to be discouraged. I'm going to not care so much about getting the rest of the drawing right. So let me see if I can get a little closer here with my camera. Okay. So this is a gorgeous little portrait. Like I said, it's kind of idealized. It doesn't look exactly like the study from life that this is based on. but it's very economical. Like there's barely anything, just a few lines, very little shading, but it's completely legible. Like the pose is very clear. The facial expression is believable and clear. And the angle of the head is probably going to be the trickiest thing for us. And what we're seeing is we're really looking up at this head. So if we look at where the eye falls, if this is the top of the head and this is the bottom, you see how eye level is above center? It's not in the middle, and that's because we are looking up at this head. The other eye would be on an angle like this. The other eye would be down here. So we're going to place this eye level up here. I'm just going to put a little smudge of dark there to show me where it goes. I'm feeling a little intimidated here drawing this head so small, but this eyebrow is really important, so we're going to put that little arched eyebrow, and whenever I look at a nose like this, I'm going to ask myself what angle it comes out at, and this angle is, I would say, about 20 degrees from vertical, so we're going to go like that. And the nose comes about halfway between the eyebrow and the bottom of the chin, like that. And we can see up into that nostril, so that nostril's really high on the nose. The lips are parted, so we have a little gap right there. And I just made her look kind of like a little monkey. Let's give her a little more chin and see what happens. Okay, so I'm not completely happy with that, but what I'm going to do before I perfect it is, it's always a good idea to just block in the shapes of the hair and the ear to get a better sense of the pose, like the angle of the head. So I'm going to put the bottom of the ear level about with the bottom of the nose. The ear's about 2/3 of the way towards the back of the head, because this is it's a 3/4 view. This headband is going to help to show the curve of the skull. And then her hair is kind of piled up on the back of her head, like here and then here. And it's another thing that a lot of people just put off paying any attention to the neck. We're going to go ahead and draw this front contour of the neck going down to the top of the sternum, and this little bit of shading in here, and little shadow under the jawline. And the back of the neck is also going to be important to show this pose, so we're going to I gotta bring my hair a little further back. And there's all we see of the back of the neck right under the hair there, and then the rest of this is trapezius. So, looking at my drawing right now, I'm thinking that it's ugly and it's wrong, but I can read the angle of the head correctly. So that's the first objective. That's really the thing that matters the most, is like, does it feel like the head's turned the right amount, and are we looking up at it the right amount? After that, we can go in and try to make it a little prettier. It's tough working at this scale. You can see how small my drawing is compared to my pencil point. But we're gonna try to make that eye look a little more open. And this nostril can be a little rounder. And we can show that, bring this corner of the mouth back a little more, make her look a little happier, show a little more upper lip. And a little less ala. The ala form I drew is huge. Maybe a little more chin. That's sort of where that classical feel is coming from, is this very strong chin. And that's going to have to do it. So I'm just going to, there's that slight suggestion of an open mouth, so I'm just going to do that, and I'm going to call it a day for the face. Again, not perfect, but let's back out again and take a look at what else is going on here. So we already drew this curve of the trapezius, curves into the deltoid, and that curves into this straighter section of triceps, back to the elbow like that. And on this side, we've got the bicep, and the arm is kind of on the thin side. Slender, I should say, with a slight overlap right here between the forearm muscles and the insertion of the bicep. Now, you can see where I laid in the rib cage, but there's shoulder blades and there's muscles around the shoulder blade area. So you'll notice that this is basically angling virtually straight up and down, and if you extended it, we'd hit the center of the deltoid. And then there's a slight swelling out around the hip, and then straight again, like that. while you're doing that, I'm just going to try to adjust the gaze a little. It's just bothering me how she's not looking up yet. I'm just going to do that a little higher. Okay. So, is everybody clear that these two little darks here are the insertions of the so now we have, let's think about where these two little darks are where the sternocleidomastoidus muscle inserts on either side of the sternum. There's a little dark here for the top surface of the clavicle, and the deltoid on the other side of the shoulder is coming out sort of centered along this neck. And so here we have, check this distance. Okay, make sure this is long enough. This is the pectoralis muscle, kind of transitioning into the breast. Notice that the front surface of the breast is, if we pull a plumb line up, it's going to hit just in front of the throat. So I've got to bring mine a little further to the left. And this goes just about straight down. We're going to block this in. We're going to think about this in terms of straight forms first. So we're going to come straight down, then we're going to angle in. And this vertical here, if I pull a plumb line, is coming from right in front of the ear. Just get into the habit of pulling these plumb lines down to relate what you're drawing to what you've already drawn. So see, you're going to come straight down from here, that's this surface. Straight down from here, that's this surface. And then we slope forward a little for the stomach until we end up behind the thigh here. Because of the angle of the rib cage, the bottom, this little shadow accent is a little higher than this surface here. So we're going to go, and it's sort of centered on the rib cage from where we're looking, like that. And you see we barely need to create any curves. Like everything's pretty much legible just in terms of these little straight lines. Here's a little compression fold just above the navel. And the navel is way over here hugging to the left of the stomach like that. Pop in a little shadow accent here and here, and that's about all we need to do for the torso. There's not a lot of good kind of form shading on this, but there's a little shadow accent along the back of the rib cage that kind of brings out this contour. And we can clean up some of the construction lines now. Okay, let's now, I don't like to use negative shapes to create a drawing, but I like to use them to check my work. So at this point, what I'm going to do is show you, I'm going to block in this negative space here. And we have done enough with our drawings that we should be able to just copying this shape should help us arrive accurately at the forms that are around it. So this comes slight break in this line like this. We've already done this part. And what I'm learning by studying this negative shape is that where I had this contour of the ball was a little bit too far to the left. Because if I had brought the shape all the way down here, it would not be the right shape. So you see how that works? It's like really useful technique for checking your work. If you start your drawing, like some teachers will have you just start every drawing by doing the negative shapes first. I like to start with a sort of more understanding of the anatomy and the structure, and then use the negative shapes later as an assessment tool. We've got another negative shape on this side we can look at. They often appear around arms, between arms and bodies. And it might even be useful for a lot of you to just compare the scale of this shape to the scale of this shape. Make sure you've got about the right relationship happening between these two shapes. And then finish the arm on the outer surfaces of the arms. The negative shapes are helping us with the inner surfaces, and then we just build the outer surface like that. So here obviously the cloth is overlapping the figure a little bit. So do get that effect in your drawing. Here's just a very subtle little plane change. And I'm going to locate that, pull another plumb line down, make sure I get that in the right place. So that is sort of the transition from the gluteal muscles to the muscles of the thigh. And we want to get that in the right place. So it's not too late to, once you have the head portrait done and the torso done, the arms, this is probably a good time to back out a little bit and make sure we're still happy with those legs. When I looked around the room, a few people were having trouble getting the legs to be the right scale. They're either too big or too small. So you can see how much easier it is to sort of check your work now that the rest of the drawing is more resolved. And I'm feeling like my legs are still a little too long, the lower legs. But this is your opportunity to fine-tune them. And now that my drawing's a little more finished, I can see I really missed with this angle here. This is quite a bit steeper in the original than I drew it. Can you see that? So it really should have been more like, let's get rid of that. It should be more like this. And that's because I remember I was using the ball as my reference and I had the ball placed a little too far to the left. So that's gonna mean moving this knee slightly this way. And that feels better to me already. So whenever you use measuring techniques, you either have to measure really accurately, like a lot more than you see me doing, and then you can trust them and not think about it again, or you have to do what I'm doing and you have to like be willing to go back and correct your work using your sort of gut feeling about how it should look. And here I have an opportunity to study another negative space between these two legs. And I'm going to include this piece of drapery in it. And hopefully that's going to help me not only place the drapery, but get the feet and the legs in the correct relation to each other. And I want you to understand, like, there's two completely different ways of thinking that we're switching back and forth on here. It's like, one way of thinking is drawing on knowledge of structure and anatomy and saying, like, does this leg look too long? Like, this still looks a little too long to me, so I'm gonna, like, just shorten the heel a little bit. So that's one way of talking to myself about what I'm doing, is like, does this look right? Is this how people generally look based on my experience in the world of looking at people, right? And the other way of thinking is completely different. It's like it's abstract thinking. So here I've got this shape, right? Does this shape match this shape over here? Are they the same shape? And that's a completely different way of thinking. It's got nothing to do with legs or people or knowledge. It's just like, are the shapes the same? And as I quickly move my eyes back and forth, I can see like, well, this, on the one on the left, this is a little steeper, so I'm going to make that correction. And then I can ask myself, how about the relationship between these shapes? Their relative size and placement. You know, are they reading in the correct relation to each other? And I've also got this third negative shape over here. And I'm looking at it like you would assess the map of a country. It's not like you would assess a person. I still feel like this needs to be a little steeper. So I just keep adjusting it until the shapes match. And I think most artists just naturally switch back and forth between these two ways of thinking. Artists with any training at all, although most beginners don't know how to think of it in terms of shapes. They only think in terms of like, I know how to draw hands, I know how to draw arms, I'm going to draw them the way I have learned to draw them. So here is this decoration on this astrological ball thing. I don't know what these are called, but that's going to help us make it look rounder and give us a few more landmarks. And here, this is going to give a lot of you trouble, but this forearm is extremely foreshortened. Because the hand has to be right here. So this limb here is coming out right towards you. It's going to be difficult for you to draw it small enough. And look how beautiful this little gesture is where she's holding this device. Excuse my ignorance. I don't know anything about astronomy. Has anyone taken astronomy? Do you know what this is? It's obviously for measuring the distance between stars or something, but and look at this beautiful little cast shadow just curving from these sticks onto the ball and showing how the ball is curving. Like that. And this sphere has a little shading along the bottom edge. And this leg is casting a shadow onto the cloth. I'm just going to draw that other hand, and then I'm going to come around and take a break, take a look at your work. So remember, hands, you want to think in terms of the body of the hand separately from the fingers. So here's where the wrist intersects the hand, and here's this box, which we can think of as the body of the hand. And that's, if you can learn to visualize this box, it's going to be very helpful in drawing hands correctly. So we're looking for the, first of all, the wrist. Where does this transition happen? And then we're looking for this three-dimensional box form that we're going to build the finger and the fingers and the thumb out from. And if you're used to drawing boxes in perspective, this isn't too hard. Then we've got the thumb is kicked out off of the left side of the box, and the fingers are bent off to the right of the box. Like that. It's a slightly awkward hand position because of the way that the fingers are and the thumb are all splayed out left and right. And we're almost out of time, so I'm going to very quickly, we're not going to draw all the toes. We're just going to block in the big toe and suggest the other toes, and the same over here. We're going to we're going to treat all these toes as a group, and then block in the big toe separately, like that. Okay, we're not going to do the drapery because this is all the time we have. You guys in class have another 2 minutes to work. Just focus on finishing the figure. Don't put your work away until 9:04, because it's only going to take you a minute. And that is our study of Vedder's study of an allegorical figure of astronomy. Thanks for watching.